Merci, Pascal. Good morning, everyone. So we are starting our second roundtable. Our theme today is regional economic integration as a vector of the competitiveness and cooperation of small island economies. As an introduction, I will start by presenting myself. My name is Laisa Roy. I'm an associate professor here at the University of New Caledonia. I am an economist. The Pacific Island countries consider that the main political organization in the region is the Pacific Islands Forum. And the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat released a document called the Framework for Pacific Regionalism. And within that framework, they say, quote, "We stand together as a Pacific region because there are significant benefits for sharing and combining our resources to leverage our voice, influence, and competitiveness, and to overcome geographical and demographic disadvantages." So today we are going to talk about many issues, but among these issues, there are important questions. One of these questions is what makes the island economies specific? What are the common challenges that we face as island economies? And where are the opportunities? Given these specific features, is it possible, and if so, how, to leverage cooperation agreements with our neighbors as a driver of economic development, employment, business opportunities, lower prices for the benefit of our populations? These are important questions for any small island economy, including New Caledonia, especially in the 2025 context. It is also a series of difficult questions because it relates to the complex interactions between trade policy, industrial policy, competitive policy, which are both highly strategic and deeply sensitive. So, how to address those important, though difficult issues in the specific case of small island economies? We've chosen to rely on the experience and expertise of those in the Pacific and beyond who are leading, contributing to, or researching on these important topics. And today we have the honor to welcome 4 eminent guests. Bula Vinaka.
Recording in progress.
Sorry. Bula Vinaka, Dr. Keshmeer MAKUN. Dr. Keshmeer MAKUN is our first guest today. He's a senior lecturer in economics at the University of the South Pacific in Fiji. And he is also a board member of the College of the Fiji Competition and Consumer Commission. Can you hear us, Keshmeer?
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa. Yes, I can hear.
Bula Vinaka. Next, we are welcoming Simon HESS. Bonjour, Simon. Simon.
Bonjour.
Yes, he's here. He's a counselor of the Committee on Trade and Development for the World Trade Organization. So he's with us from Geneva today. He's also the head of monitoring and evaluation for the HESS integrated framework. We are also welcoming Dr. Clarence HENRY. Bonjour.
Good day, everyone.
Good day. Dr. Clarence HENRY is the acting head of regional integration within the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, the OECS. And he's talking from St. Lucia today. And also, Talofa Roy. Roy LAGOLAGO is with us here today. He's the head of the Secretariat of the PEI plus the Pacific Agreement on Closer Economic Relations. So the PEI plus Implementation Unit and Labor Mobility in Samoa, sorry. The first A is a long A. Talofa Roy. So this is a great opportunity to welcome physically and also virtually our four eminent guests today and to discuss with them. So let's get started. Dr. Makun, I will ask you a first question, if you will. In your opinion, and as a researcher, economist, what are the common challenges faced by the small island economies?
Thank you, Laisa, and good morning, fellow panelists, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends, Vulavinaka and Bonzo. I want to begin, before I answer that question, Lisa, I want to acknowledge the New Caledonian Competition Authority and the University of New Caledonia for organizing this wonderful conference, and thank you for invitation to be part of this panel. I apologize for not being in person, but it's an honor to be part of this important conversation on Pacific integration. I'm sorry I have not prepared any presentation or PPT to share, but I do have notes to which I will refer to answer your question. So I want to begin to answer your question. I want to begin by saying that our region is unlike any other in the world. And we are made up of small, scattered nations, separated by vast oceans, but we are connected by common culture and shared challenges. And each of our economies, as you know, is small in scale, often dependent on narrow export base and vulnerable to global fluctuations. In addition to that, infrastructure costs are very high, shipping routes are long, and bargaining powers are limited. And the world is entering into a new era, the era of end-to development assistance or end-to aid. And indeed, this sudden cut in the international development assistance is exceptionally painful in the Pacific Island countries. But perhaps the most important and critical challenge is the climate change crisis that Pacific Island countries are facing. The rising sea levels, cyclones, floods, they no longer pose abstract risk to us. They are directly threatening our lives, livelihoods, and in fact, our entire economic ecosystem. So it is an existential economic challenge. And so given these challenges, I think the question is how or why openness and integration is necessary. And I think, in my view, it is getting very clearer. The Pacific cannot thrive alone. By opening our economies to trade, investment, knowledge exchange, we can actually create opportunities for growth, resilience, and prosperity. In fact, for the Pacific, openness and integration are not just policy choice. It is becoming a lifeline. And this morning, there are two considerations that I want to advance, which, in my view, I think lies at the heart of openness and integration. Of course, there are many ways in which you can do that. Trade, labor mobility, remittances. These are well explained in the literature. But the two considerations that I want to take this morning is first, from the perspective of the climate change crisis, and second, from the perspective of infrastructure and connectivity deficit in the Pacific Island countries. And so the first, on the climate change crisis, we know that we are on the front line of this crisis. The annual adaptation or mitigation alone for the Pacific is running in US billions of dollars. And according to the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat estimate, it is expected to rise to about $5.2 billion annually by 2030. And in fact, the total amount of grant-based climate change finance that is coming into the Pacific is less than 5% of the total amount. So what does this tell us? It tells us that climate impacts are costly, and no one single country can carry the burden alone. And here I emphasize the need for openness to partnership. By being open to regional and international partnership, we can better secure climate finance, technical expertise, coordinate disaster response, and also global solidarity. Funding and partnership becomes effective when we engage openly and collectively. When we talk about climate change, openness to clean technology is also very important. We hardly talk about energy poverty issues in the island nations. We are still grappling with energy poverty issues, and that has implications on not our macroeconomic outcomes, but socioeconomic outcomes like health and education. So equally important is transitioning away from fossil fuels or biomass fuels. But we also know that renewable energy technology is expensive. So how do we deal with that? And in my view, by opening up, working together, Pacific nations can jointly invest in this area as well, or at least jointly procure these expensive technologies, which could result in cleaner and more affordable energy and greater energy security for our people. Similarly, on our own, we are small emitters, but we have limited influence. But when we are together, I think our voices carry weight. And one of the examples of this openness and togetherness is the 1.5 degrees Celsius that we managed to agree in the Paris Accord. So by integrating our diplomacy, by being open up, we ensure will listen to us. Openness to regional and global cooperation is equally important here. So that was one angle in which we can look at. The second angle that I'm taking over here is the infrastructure and connectivity deficit. Infrastructure is backbone of any development that we talk about. Unfortunately, Pacific confronts a woefully expanding infrastructure deficit. The deficit can also be seen as connectivity deficit. And it is critical barrier to sustainable and climate resilience development for the island nation. Here I'm not just talking about roads, bridges, and buildings. It is also about deficit of our hope and opportunity. So what else we need? We need openness to investment. Our small population makes it difficult for individual countries to finance large projects, whether it be road, buildings, bridges, airports, or shipping fleets. But through open and regional integration, we can pool resources together. We can develop shared facilities. And regional shipping, for example, could reduce cost for trade and strengthen supply chains. Shared aviation agreements can ensure reliable connection between islands, which can also further strengthen our trade and tourism in the island nations. So not only that, attracting foreign investment is also important because we lack capital. So it will bring capital, technology, and know-how that our economies cannot generate on their own. And it is not only about physical infrastructure. Digital connectivity is also becoming an important aspect of our economic development. Openness and regional integration allows us to jointly invest in internet cables, satellite system, The Manatu-Awan Polynesia cable is a classic example of how island nations can coordinate, reduce cost, and access to digital connectivity. So the point that I'm making is that with this stronger digital connectivity, we can open up opportunities in other areas, for example, e-commerce, education, telemedicine, and even remote working. And talking about skills, we can then share labor mobility and benefit from the skills that different Pacific Island countries have. So this can only happen if countries work together openly, in my view. And before I stop, I just want to make another point. Openness and integration also help us to close some market gaps that we are facing, because we understand that no single country can build complete industrial base. But when we specialize and complement each other, I think we are able to do something. For example, Fiji has some strength in tourism and services. Other countries like PNG is rich in natural resources. Small atoll islands, they have large economic exclusive zone for fisheries resources. So by opening up and integrating, I think we can create more diverse and resilient regional economy. Of course, you might argue that this is all known and it is easy to say. Openness is without risk, right? Exposure to global shocks can destabilize our entire economic system. And that is why I think the real question is not about whether to be open or not. I think the real question is about how strategically we can open up. And to sum up, I think Lisa, to answer your question, the point that I'm making here is for small island economies, integration and openness are not optional. It is becoming a lifeline policy, and therefore in achieving sustainable economic development becomes important. And not only that, building resilience to climate change and ensuring that Pacific is not left behind in the global economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh. Thank you, Keshmeer. Thank you for your words. So you said this is not a question of whether we should open, but how to do it. I think this is a question for Simon, actually. Simon, if you agree, how can small island economies leverage global and regional integration for development, in your view?
Yep. Okay. Great. Wonderful. It's really an honor to join you all this morning, and greetings from Geneva. I'd also, first of all, like to echo Professor Makun in greeting you all in the room, as well as expressing our appreciation to the Competition Authority of New Caledonia and the University of New Caledonia for organizing this excellent event. I think Professor Makun set the scene very well around the characteristics of small economies, and perhaps if you allow me, before I get into some of the ideas on what can be done, how can small island economies take advantage of opportunities that they have to integrate. I'd like to maybe expand a little bit further and build on the base that we have here. Findings from the WTO's World Trade Report in 2024 show that deeper integration into global trading networks significantly boosts productivity, income, and resilience for vulnerable economies, such as small island developing states. And maybe to give you a little bit of context as well in some of the things that I'll be speaking about, in the World Trade Organization, there is a dedicated work program on small and vulnerable economies. Although not all members of this group are island economies, all of the members, except for 2, are coastal nations, and 24 of the 33 members of that group are classified as small island developing states, or SIDS. As such, I'll be referring to some of the information on SIDS and the group of small economies, given the direct relevance to small island economies and some of the ideas and lessons that can maybe be picked up. As Professor Makun mentioned, integration is highly important and in some ways is indeed a lifeline. For instance, with regards to food security, trade can play an extremely important role. And also, small island economies are often amongst the most trade-linked economies in the world. So to give you a sense of scale, globally, the average trade to gross domestic product GDP ratio is around 86%. However, for small economies, it is at around 93%. Trade can also be key in providing essential goods, including food and fuel, as well as in times of natural disasters, being able to quickly ship goods and services, as well as being a key avenue for a number of countries in securing investment and jobs. Within the WTO, there have been a number of small island economies that have been in the accession process or have indeed recently acceded. That the two most recent countries that acceded were Comoros and Timor-Leste, and then some other potential members in the process of accession are Bahamas and Caraïbe as well. Also, when we look at the characteristics of small island economies, we see that market access itself is not necessarily the main issue. I think, as the professor just mentioned, there are many other factors that act as constraints. In fact, small island economy, when you look at the SIDS group, 96% of SIDS exports enter developed economies duty-free, with a trade-weighted average of less than 1%. And in fact, amongst almost all groupings of countries, this is about the lowest. So market access really isn't the issue. So where are the key challenges? One, high trade costs. We heard earlier about the connectivity issues. Remoteness is also a key factor here. Many island economies are not well linked into major trading hubs, which can increase the cost of shipping, as well as being impacted by reduced frequency of shipping, which can have an impact on supply chains. For instance, if ships only come through once a month, that can constrain the type of products maybe that are imported or exported from those countries. So a recent study actually by UNCTAD has shown that Pacific SIDS pay about double the global average for shipping per ton kilometer. So this really is a fact, and it's impacted by a number of different factors, and in addition to remoteness, some of which are also related to the things like port handling charges and other logistics issues. Island economies are obviously very exposed to fluctuations in freight costs, and when freight costs go up, are often disproportionately impacted in terms of the transmission rate of prices into the domestic economy. So there was one study that showed that SIDS, for instance, might be up to 5 times more vulnerable than other economies when the ship freight rates increase. So during the freight rates crisis recently, the research showed that consumer prices increased by about 1.5% generally across the board. However, they could increase by up to 7.5 percentage points in the SIDS. Secondly, non-tariff measures. So meeting particularly SPS and TBT requirements, as well as other customs procedures, while legitimate, add cost and complexity, particularly for small economies. And this is also affected by the product mix that many island economies have, which might include products that are that face non-tariff measures, like food products would face more non-tariff measures than many other non-food products, for instance. And then, as mentioned, I think the integration in global and regional value chains is somewhat constrained, including the intra-regional trade. So within the SIDS group of countries, intra-regional trade remains low, despite members of the SIDS or WTO members of SIDS participating in more than 50 regional trade agreements. So that's something that is a possibility to explore a bit further. When we look at opportunities, what can be done? One is looking to reduce the costs of trade facilitation. So within the WTO, we have the WTO's trade facilitation agreement. And by implementing a number of those provisions, island economies can look to streamline customs, improve transparency, cut delays, and reduce time and costs for businesses. A number of island economies in the Pacific, for instance, are leading, I think, in some of these areas. I know in Vanuatu, the National Single Window for Trade has been a key tool in reforming business processes and moving mechanisms online for farmers and producers across the various islands of the country that are able to now process export and import requests without needing inter-island travel for that paperwork. This has not only led to, obviously, a reduction in paper being used, but also CO2 emissions from the reduced requirements of transport. Investing into other ways of addressing standards, for instance, through laboratories, processes, is also another key area, and that's where initiatives such as the Standards and Trade Development Facility, which is a global partnership to facilitate safe trade, can play a role in helping to support those processes and connecting into international best practices. Something that I think, Professor Makun, you mentioned as well around regional collaboration is key. So we mentioned shipping, for instance, collaboration in shipping, looking at palletizing products so you don't need entire containers, for instance. Increasing the frequency of shipping for businesses can be useful. It can also be through harmonizing standards, for instance, pooling resources for quality infrastructure. And that's where the initiative through PIFs and the Pacific Quality Infrastructure Initiative is looking to build skills and common frameworks in the region So working together on some of these soft areas are also really, really critical. Digital trade and e-commerce, I think it has been mentioned. This helps to remove the distance issues that island economies face. And there's already a good base within a number of economies. So when we did some research in the WTO and on the small economies, the availability and the use of internet was generally good. In fact, most of the members of the group had internet access rates above the world average. So there's something there that can be built on, and investing further in digital skills and the supportive regulatory frameworks will really be key to harnessing these advantages. And something useful to watch in this regard is the WTO's joint statement on e-commerce that brings together over 90 WTO members, accounting for a very large proportion of world trade. And then finally, I think there are other things to look for within the WTO, the ministerial decision on small economies, for instance, that I referred to earlier, is meaning that small islands issues are being taken up and discussed in the WTO in a very focused way. Earlier this year, we looked at digital trade and e-commerce, constraints and opportunities. We'll shortly be discussing supply chains, vulnerabilities and resilience, also with respect to food security and trade costs. And then also later in the year, looking at climate change and trade issues. And I should also mention that within the small island economies, there are many opportunities for niche products, some of which are already being harnessed and taken advantage of right now, such as Fiji water, as well as other high-value commodities, as well as opportunities in renewable energy, sustainable fisheries, and services in the blue economy as well. Thank you very much. I'll stop here.
So thank you for your inputs. So you were talking, among other things, about trade facilitation and also convergence in standards and regulatory frameworks, capacity building, the importance of taking into account the specific vulnerabilities of the Pacific Islands, of the small islands, and also working on niche markets. So this gives us a very nice transition for Roy. Roy, could you, maybe after reminding us of what pay surplus is, maybe elaborate on the opportunities of joining pay surplus for the Pacific economies as regard all these inputs that Simon just suggested, please.
Kia orana, Nisa Yanta, Kamna Māori, whakalowhalahi atu ki mutolu osi. Tēnā koutou, talawhalawa, halo geta, malo e tau mao e pongi ni, whakatalofa atu, bonjour, and a warm Pacific greetings to all. I'd like to echo the sentiments of my distinguished panelist guests in thanking New Caledonia for organising this very important conference. I'd like to acknowledge the leadership of Stefan under the competent authority and the University of New Caledonia for inviting me to be part of this conference. I'm based in Samoa, so it's good to be back in New Caledonia. I'm always worried when I go to conferences and there's a lot of economists around, you know, analysing everything. So There's quite a few here in this room, and I know there'll be differing opinions. So just go easy on us panelists. We're just here to present and have discussions. So it's really, really good to be here. And a big thank you, of course, to our moderator, Laisa, for looking after me while I've been here in New Caledonia. So, merci beaucoup. That's the extent of my French. Apologies to everyone here. But yes, PESA Plus. So I think before we can understand or probably answer the question that has been put forward, I think it's important to understand the origins of PESA Plus. It hasn't been a quick process. It commenced in 2001, actually, but it was called PESA, the Pacific Agreement on Closer Economic Relations. Negotiations started for the agreement in 2009, so a very long time. And unlike other trade agreements in the region, there's a lot of unique elements about PESA Plus. And one of the unique elements of PESA Plus was when negotiations commenced in 2009. Australia and New Zealand took the unusual step, and I'm not sure if this is done in any other trade agreements, to train the negotiators from each of the Pacific countries to be able to negotiate with Australia and New Zealand on PESA Plus. So this was a very unique step. It's not seen anywhere else, or I've heard of where the bigger countries trained the smaller island economies to actually negotiate a trade agreement. And so as I go through this presentation, this discussion, there are a number of unique elements about PESA Plus, which is unlike other trade agreements that we know of in this region or in other parts of the world. So yes, that's one of the most unique things, is the bigger economies trained the Pacific Island economies negotiate to be able to negotiate against them. I'm not sure if that's done before, but someone may be able to correct me if I'm wrong. In 2017, the agreement was finally signed by a number of Pacific countries, and it wasn't until 2020 that the PESA Plus agreement was actually ratified by 8 countries. Once it was ratified in 2020, it actually came into force, into being. The countries that ratified PESA Plus were Australia, New Zealand, Cook Islands, Tuvalu, Solomon Islands. Thank you, Laisa. She's put it up there. Yeah. And then in 2022, Tuvalu and Vanuatu ratified the agreement, totaling 10 countries to ratify PESA Plus. As I mentioned, PESA Plus is quite a unique agreement. It comes with a development assistance component. So unlike PICTA, Sparta, EPA that we heard about last night, PESA Plus actually has a development component, which is funded by Australia and New Zealand. The development component is to assist parties or countries that have joined PESA Plus to implement the agreement, to support them in continuing to open up their markets, open up trade, which is quite important for small island economies that have limited revenue and government funds to fund these sort of activities. Another unique element about PESA Plus is a secretariat has been specifically set up to support, coordinate, and assist countries to implement PESA Plus. So that secretariat is the PESA Plus Implementation Unit, which I am the head of in Samoa, and our role is to support the 10 countries to implement and provide opportunities under PESA Plus, which is another unique element of this agreement. Another unique element of the agreement is there were discussions yesterday, very emotional discussions last night about opening up your economies or small island economies to trade. The other unique thing about PESA Plus is there's a transition period of up to 20 to 25 years to allow countries to slowly transition to opening up parts or sectors to the outside. It's not an immediate, doesn't take an immediate effect. So this is another unique element. So yesterday I heard in French, and I gathered from the emotion and the body language that it had something to do with opening up trade and the liberalization of trade and the impact it will have on small island economies. If I think about New Caledonia and the economy here, it's similar to the Cook Islands and Niue, who are in free association or are under New Zealand. And so there's elements there about protecting your sectors, which brings me to another unique element of PESA Plus. There's opportunity under the trade agreement to reserve and restrict certain sectors for locals only. And this is where there's opportunities under PESA Plus and for small island economies such as New Caledonia to figure out which sectors you want to restrict and which sectors you want to reserve for your locals, you know? So it's not all about opening up this big influx of trade into New Caledonia and taking over, or Pacific countries and taking over all your economies, all your businesses and things like that. No, it's about being able to support and allow you to reserve and restrict which sectors you think you want to protect as part of PESA Plus. And these are all elements we can support. As my learned panelists mentioned, I won't talk about the climate change and all those sort of things, but pick up on some of the points that Simon mentioned. Some of the things that we are currently doing on the PESA Plus is supporting countries to implement new legislation, regulations, standards, automation, automate your biosecurity systems, automate your customs systems, develop e-commerce and digital platforms to support your economies. As Mia mentioned yesterday, services is a big element where small island economies can actually benefit from. Another unique element about PESA Plus is the only trade agreement in this region that has services and investment as part of its components. So majority of the trade agreements in this region are focused on goods, whereas PESA Plus has investment services, as well as labour mobility, as was mentioned by our learned panels. We also look at supporting countries to put policies in place to attract the right investment. Not any type of investment, the right investment. By helping you support with policy or legislation, investment attraction strategies, your standards, those sort of things. That's the sort of things that we've supported PESA Plus countries to implement, and also provide support for your small, medium enterprise businesses, either for meeting the standards to export or meeting standards to export, such as your packaging, your labeling, your testing of your products to ensure it meets the standards, whether it's Europe, Asia, Australia, or New Zealand. So this is really important for us to enable businesses to still be able to trade under a trade agreement, but also provide the support that they need to be able to export, whether it's services or goods. We also have a big focus on inclusivity, which is women, people with disabilities, youth, and inclusivity meaning also people in your outer islands, not just the mainland, but outer islands, rural areas, giving them opportunities to create businesses, be able to trade, food security, as was discussed by some of our panelists. So these are some of the opportunities under PESA Plus. Small island economies have large, fertile land. The challenges, as was mentioned by Kusha, that was the climate change and being climate resilient. So I think these are some of the key things under PESA Plus. It's supporting your export sector, supporting your service sector, supporting your investment, but also in providing the enabling environment, whether it's legislative, regulatory, those sort of things, standards that are required. One of the things that I've heard this morning as well as yesterday was labour mobility. Another unique aspect of PESA Plus, a side arrangement was signed by a number of countries, which is the arrangement on labour mobility, which allows people low-skilled or semi-skilled to be able to either travel to Australia and New Zealand to work over there, earn money, and return back home for a period of time. Bring that money back into the economy, create businesses. Some people that have gone on labour mobility to Australia and New Zealand have been able to return back home and create their own businesses for their own families, support their families by being able to earn more money while in Australia and New Zealand, but also return back home to be able to create new businesses. And we have a program which is called the reintegration program, which allows the reintegration back into your country or your small island economies. Labour mobility is not without its challenges. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There are challenges of labour mobility, especially welfare of the people that travel to Australia and New Zealand. Big new country, you go from a small village where there's only probably 50 people to a huge place where there's hundreds of thousands of people, and you have access to everything. So there's always those challenges going from these small places. Also challenges on families that these workers will leave behind. And obviously there's the labour shortages that are always mentioned. So with every opportunity, there's also challenges of these opportunities. And so I think that's important for people to be aware of. There's also challenges with PESA Plus as a trade agreement. It's not all positive and exciting. There's always challenges such as the political will to make changes, the risk that some people mentioned last night about the changes that may occur, the unknowns, the possible impact on your trade, your imports, your export, revenue. But as I mentioned, PESA Plus has this opportunity where you have 20 to 25 years to transition. And some of the activities or programs we have been running recently over the last few years, and the PESA Plus is how do we support small island economies to expand your revenue base. So we work quite closely with other partners, and I think this is really important. We work together with the World Bank, ADB, IMF, PIFTAC based in Fiji, and all the customs administrations to look at where there's opportunities that will fit your island economy, because it won't be the same. Each economy will be different. You have your own unique things about your economies that will not be the same across the board. And so having these revenue mobilization programs to allow economies and governments to consider opportunities and thinking of where to expand your tax base, your revenue base, those sort of things, I think is really important. And so these are some of the programs that are currently in place at the moment to support that. So I think this is quite a unique and important thing for trade agreements, which is not well known. And just probably finally, as I touch on a few things, we are about to go into the next cycle of PESA Plus. So we're ending this first cycle, which will end in December 2025. And now we're looking to progress to the next cycle, which will go up to 2030. And so there's new priorities. We're moving countries from just creating the enabling environment. We now have a large focus on private sector development. This is something that PESA Plus countries, also the PIFS Forum Secretariat under their 2050 strategy, is moving towards to encourage the development of the private sector. and looking at opportunities for the private sector. I think partnership is really important. So all the acronyms that you may know of in the Pacific, like PERS, ADB, World Bank, SPC, FFA, OCO, the list goes on, WTO, we work with all of them. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges we have here in our region, is the congestion of so many donors and organizations operating in the same space. And so a large majority of the work that we do at PESA Plus is look at coordinating opportunities to ensure that we don't duplicate what's going on. So I think that's also something that's really important. There's so many donors, there's a lot of geopolitics going on in the region, there's a lot of tensions between the big nations, and I think this is important for us as smaller economies to consider and take into account as we look for opportunities to either open up trade, liberalize some of our tariffs, you know, and look at areas that will fit our own economies. And I recall someone said yesterday, has to be a win-win. You know, there's got to be a win-win. But I agree with Mia, you know, win-win doesn't happen straight away. A win-win, it'll take time. And under PESA Plus, you got 20 to 25 years, so I'm sure that's a lot of time. A lot can happen in that time. Some of us may not be around in that time, so it's a really long period to draw out what people want out of a trade agreement and what can be done under PESA Plus. And so the final thing I'd just like to say is PESA Plus is country-driven. It's not driven by Australia or New Zealand. Each country will drive their own agenda in terms of what they want, whether it's e-commerce, digital platforms, integration of technology, AI. Each country has their own unique country plan in accordance with their government's priorities. So it's not driven by Australia and New Zealand, it's driven by the countries themselves. And sometimes those elements that countries want are not what Australia and New Zealand may want, but that's fine because under PESA Plus, it's important that countries are recognized as independent sovereign countries that are able to make their own decisions and drive their own agenda to ensure that the benefits of PESA Plus will not only benefit some people, but benefit a wider community. And that also means people in the rural areas, not just in the urban areas, but people in the outer islands. As you know, many of our Pacific Island countries, it's not only 1 or 2 or 3 islands, you know, there's 360 islands, some like Fiji, 360 islands, you know, Samoa, 10, 15 islands. So how do we ensure that all those people in those outer islands also benefit? So that's one key driver that we're really pushing for under PESA Plus. It's not just the mainland that benefits from a trade agreement, but everyone. And so that's just my final point, but merci beaucoup et malo habito.
Merci. Merci. So PESA Plus is intended to be a very comprehensive economic development and collaboration agreement, and you were underlining the importance of political will, and also taking into account the very concrete aspects of economic development. And so I'd like to ask now Clarence HENRY, maybe some advice actually, because the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States is quite a deep integration process. And Clarence, could you maybe tell us, based on both your research and your experience at the head of the OECS, Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, what are, according to you, the main impediments and boosters for deepening economic cooperation?
Good morning, everyone. I want to join my colleagues in also expressing our gratitude to the Competition Authority and the New Caledonia University for inviting my organization and myself in particular to share some insights on the matter of regional integration advancement, particularly in the context of improving trade competitiveness. I wish to start, though, first by emphasizing on the starting point. My colleagues in this esteemed panel would have highlighted certain key facts that we need to consider. The poor trade performance, for instance, of a lot of small island developing states, and the issues around limited access to market, and in some cases where access to market has been granted, such as in our region through the CARIFORUM European Union Economic Partnership Agreement, you still see limited capacity to leverage these markets. The issues around connectivity and transportation challenges are quite similar as well within the context of Caribbean small island developing states. And so I see some comparative issues emerging with what exists in the Caribbean region and some of what challenges the Pacific region as well. Now, having said this, though, there are a number of economic and political dimensions, I think, that needs to be considered. What we know for a fact is that small states have limited production mix and certainly limited ability to produce. So the whole idea of no critical mass is always mentioned, and the issue of limited production integration. And so you have the challenges associated with low intra-regional trade. And of course, more contemporary issues around geographical limitations, and of course, the climate change threat that I think our leaders continue to argue against. So I start with these issues in mind so that we reposition again the value that regional integration within the context of small regions play in addressing some of those developmental woes and some of those challenges at the global level, as my colleagues on this esteemed panel have surely indicated as well. And so within the context of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, we are a regional integration body made up of 12 small island states, of which we have 7 full members that form the Eastern Caribbean Economic Union, and then, of course, some associate members, 3 of which are French territories, and you also have 2 which are British territories within the context of our arrangement. What is important to note is that over the 44 years of existence of the OECS, there are several areas that we've sought to leverage in order to be able to be impactful on the development front for our member states. And I think there are at least 3 areas I wish to highlight in that regard. And then it speaks, therefore, to the issue of the practical issue of how the implementation of regional integration should be considered in order to address some of and support addressing some of those challenges that I would have highlighted earlier, and colleagues would have done the same. And so for us, leveraging colonial arrangements have been a significant contributor to advancing development within the small states. And I refer here to 2 examples. So many of you may or may not know that the OECS has a monetary union arrangement, the Eastern Caribbean dollar, managed by the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank within the context of the Eastern Caribbean Monetary Union, for which there are 8 member states in this arrangement, the 7 full member states of the OECS that I referred to earlier, and Anguilla. What has been noticeable with this arrangement is that there has continued to be a significant level of monetary stability in the OECS because of that. And inflation levels compared to countries within our region with monetary independence and their own central bank in that context have been comparatively better. There are still inflationary pressures, but when you compare over a fairly reasonable time series, even at times where there are global shocks, such as the 2008 financial crisis, you recognize that many of the economies that form the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union tend to fare better. And this arrangement existed prior to the independence movement in the late 70s and early 1980s. So we've learned to leverage what we were given. The sharing of resources have become a major issue, and the regional arrangement have leveraged this. And so I use, for instance, the movement towards shared public services, the existence of a single court. The Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court is a good example of that, where member states leveraging the sharing of resources have one existing court which manage judicial matters across the member states that participate in the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court community. That's another good example of leveraging regional integration to address development needs. And thirdly, the understanding the emergence of trade liberalization over the more than 2 decades or so, and the whole concept of globalization, economic globalization, have been a very critical thing for our countries in the Eastern Caribbean. And these 2 phenomena, in fact, have had significant life-changing impacts for a lot of our countries. So one may refer to, for instance, how trade liberalization would have changed the trajectory of agricultural production and export in these countries. Countries like St. Lucia, St. Vincent and Grenadines, the Commonwealth of Dominica, were major exporters of bananas. St. Kitts and Nevis, major exporters of sugar. And the impact of trade liberalization saw the withdrawal of the accommodations that made our producers in these countries competitive. I raise those issues because it meant and demonstrated to our leaders that there was need to go beyond the monetary union arrangement. There was need for an economic union, a full single market and economy arrangement in order to use such arrangement as the launch pad for intense global competition. And so the Eastern Caribbean Economic Union was established in 2010 through the revision of the Treaty of Bastille that established the OECS in 1981. And while there are 8 core objectives of that arrangement, what it recognized was the need and the importance of creating a sort of rethinking of the economic structure for these economies in order to address the need to become more competitive. And part of that included the need for re-examining how trade flows, trading goods, for instance, move across the economic union. And so the concept of free circulation of goods as a key framework emerged as one example in that regard. The concept of seamless movement of persons became a significant area of importance to implement. And so consequently today, our citizens are able to travel with the use of a valid government issued ID and receive indefinite stay upon arrival in these countries and ease of access for employment, which we have seen been leveraged even at times of major climatic events, such as the occurrence of the Cat 5 Hurricane Maria in Cornwall, Dominica in 2017, which really caused significant damages, but also resulted in the need for significant labor demands to address reconstruction needs, right? And then, of course, the recognition as well for the greater ease of movement of establishments through the rights of establishment consideration, so businesses can establish. I think fundamentally, and what I really want to point out in my initial comments in this panel is the issue of political will. Because again, we know the facts. We know that small states need to pivot to address their competitive needs. We know that small states can't do it alone because the physical restrictions that they have will be there forever. And so they are small in size, both population and landmass. So we know that. We know that they're heavily impacted by climate change. The islands in the Caribbean and in the Pacific cannot be removed from their geographical location. So we know that's the issue. And we know that regional integration, as I gave those examples of the Eastern Caribbean, can be an impactful approach to addressing those challenges. But regional integration cannot happen on its own. And it requires governments to act. And the concept of political will becomes a critical matter. And so I want to make reference to one example in that regard. Everything across the board where implementing regional integration concern involves a piece of legislation at some point and the requirement for each participating member state to act in that regard. What we have noticed is that this is one of the most challenging things to happen as countries determine based on their political reality at the time and economic reality at the time when they should act to implement, to enact and implement a piece of legislation. Now, in the context of the OECS, from the inception of the revised treaty discussion, it was recognized that supranational powers are important. We've seen how it has worked in the European Union in many respects. In our context in the OECS, we've seen how supranational powers granted to a monetary union has been helpful in that regard. And so the treaty makes provision for the organization to act swiftly on key elements that would impact the economic union. But while that has not been adequately implemented, at least in my view and the views of many others as well, there are other elements of the revised treaty that allows then authority of the heads of government, which we call the OECS authority, to make decisions that become binding once they do not impact constitutional provisions. So earlier I made reference to the ability of our citizens to travel with the use of a government issued ID. That was a OECS authority decision. not a legislative decision. The decision for indefinite stay was initially an OECS authority decision, which then became a legislative action even after it was implemented. And so the point I'm making here is that if regional integration within the context of small states and small regions are expected to be effective, one really cannot go around the importance of supranational authority, which will help enhance political action and political will. Primarily because the issues around the most optimum economic and political time to act becomes less of an issue for a regional institution or arrangement with supranational powers when compared to a national government having to act. And so I think it's a very good lesson that we have learned, and a good experience from our end within the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, and one for which we continue to leverage to continue the advancement of the integration process within the OECS. I must say, though, that it takes a certain consideration to allow for the development and growth of supranational institutions. I think part of it requires a full understanding and belief in the powers of regional integration to be developmental, to address the challenges associated with limited capacity to compete at the global level with respect to foreign direct investment and trade issues. And I think once there is an appreciation of how it can help, and ultimately how it can, and I've done in my own studies, research, how it can impact positively the political climate within the countries that form part of these arrangements, I believe there might be the environment for a greater movement towards supranational powers that address the issues on political will and quicker implementation. I think I will stop here for now, but certainly there is no question that regional integration is critical for small states development, even at the time in the contemporary era where there is a withdrawal in development assistance among more developed regions and countries. The question for us is, what is the best modality for bringing about a stronger regional integration arrangement that addresses some of those core needs now, rather than 5-10 years down the road where the problems have multiplied tenfold. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Henry, for your insights. Est-ce que vous avez des questions? Vous pouvez les poser en français, elles seront traduites.
Hi everyone, this is Mana from ANU. I'm from Tahiti, and I had a question to Mr. LAGOLAGO. I was just wondering, sorry if I misspell your name. I noticed that many Micronesian countries and larger island economies were not part of the PEI Plus program, and I was just wondering what was holding them to join it. And then I was wondering also another question: what synergies could be developed between all the members and including the French Pacific territories? I was wondering if you were aware of potential areas of synergies. Thank you.
Yorana, thank you for the question. Look, I think with the big economies, I think you're referring to probably Papua New Guinea, Fiji. We're currently working with Fiji to look at the opportunities for joining PESA Plus. As was mentioned, political will is the first thing. If a country doesn't have the political will, then it's always going to be a challenge, because politicians tend to make decisions for the people. And so these are the challenges. But at the moment, we are working with Fiji to look to join PESA Plus. As we know, Fiji is a regional hub for the Pacific region. And so these are some of the things that we are working on. In terms of some of the synergies that you speak about, I think some of the synergies will be in the services, trade area, and investment. Given that New Caledonia has limited exports, similar to other small island economies, like Cook Islands and Niue, limited exports, but they're looking at things through e-commerce and digital trade, looking to create those sort of things to help expand businesses overseas, and looking at niche markets. If I think about Niue, who has limited exports, if you don't know, Niue probably has the most purest honey in the world. Italian bees make the honey in Niue, and so it's quite a niche market for that honey to be exported overseas, and a lot of countries in Asia and Europe are interested. So I think sometimes it comes down to the niche market rather than the big demand market. And I think that's where some of the small island economies, if we look at the likes of Niue, Kiribati, if some of you don't already know, Kiribati has a luxury boat building business that export to Australia and also export out to other countries. So it's quite a niche market that they target. It's not a big high demand market, but it's these sort of things that each small island economy can look at in terms of what they want to achieve through a trade agreement. And so with the trade agreement, Kiribati used to pay 35% on those luxury yachts or boats that they used to export to Australia. But once the Kiribati ratified the agreement, it got zeroed. So the tariffs were zeroed. So no longer 35% on the tariffs. Another example, probably Solomon Islands. If you don't know, Solomon Islands exports a lot of tuna, but also a lot of tuna in cans. And same sort of thing. Looking at 35% tariffs of canned tuna into Australia, and I think approximately 20 or 25 tariff into New Zealand. Once Solomon Islands signed the trade agreement or ratified the trade agreement, those tariffs were zeroed. And so for businesses like in the Pacific, like Sol Tuna and the boat builder in Kiribati, that's a big savings on the margin, for their businesses. And so I think there's, as I mentioned before, each economy will have their own niche market that they will look to target, as opposed to trying to compete with other bigger economies to meet our demand on bigger products. And so that's what we found in PESA Plus, is each sort of country is say, hey, we're looking at export of vanilla, and we're looking at small amounts. We're just after the boutique market or the luxury market, so they target that. And so that way, they're able to trade. And like I said, some of the things we do support businesses with is the certification, because there's requirements under the EU or Australia, New Zealand to meet certain biosecurity requirements. And so we support those businesses either to get their certification for HACCP controlled or labeling. We also get the products tested to ensure that they meet the standards of the country that they're going to go to. So these are just some of the things I think, probably some of the synergies. In terms of, if you probably don't know, the Northern Pacific, which I think you're referring to, which we got a couple of Micronesian countries in PESA Plus, but the Northern Pacific negotiated their schedules already. So they're already there, they're in place. I think they're going to get through the negotiations with the US first as part of the free association to ensure they make the most out of that before they then look to other trade agreements in the region. So the Northern Pacific countries some of them have already negotiated their schedules for joining PESA Plus. But I think their priority first is to ensure the agreement between them and the US is finalized before they look to other trade agreements. Hopefully that answers your questions. Malo.
Oui, une autre question là-haut.
Oui, bonjour. Donc, moi, je suis maraîchère professionnelle en zone rurale, éloignée, sur Bourail. Et je suis aussi représentante de la FNSEA Nouvelle-Calédonie, un syndicat agricole qui représente beaucoup de producteurs, que ce soit en filière végétale, animale, mais aussi les producteurs au niveau de la pêche. Je voudrais m'adresser à la personne pour Passer Plus, puisque je vois un peu beaucoup plus de similitudes qui pourraient nous convenir. Vous parlez qu'il y a qu'il faut la volonté politique. Autre la volonté politique, est-ce qu'il n'y a pas la possibilité de, par exemple, travailler entre groupements d'entrepreneurs privés avec d'autres groupements d'entrepreneurs privés sans pour autant attendre que les politiques se décident. Par exemple, pour des, comme ça a été mis là, des échanges de savoir-faire ou de matériel ou de production spécifique. C'est-à-dire que dans certains pays, il doit y avoir des savoir-faire que nous, on n'a pas. Enfin, créer des entreprises mais pas spécialement d'attendre les institutions publiques.
Ok, I will try. Je vais réduire. So for our English-speaking guests, Madame is an agriculture in the agricultural sector, and she is representing fellow people working in agriculture and hunting and fishing. Ah oui, d'accord, on va traduire encore. And tell me if I'm wrong, but she wants to know whether instead of waiting for politicians to take action, is it possible for business groups in agriculture and other sectors to collaborate at the regional scale, sorry? On va déjà répondre à cette question, je crois.
Yes. Thank you for the question. There are already groups that there are already regional groups that meet, like the Plant Protection Organization. Okay.
Maybe you can just answer and then I will try to translate.
Okay. Technology, eh? Good when it works and not so good when it doesn't work. So bear with us. So yes, there are already groups, especially for agriculture, that are in the region that are able to access to support agriculture, horticulture, apiculture, viticulture, all the cultures you can think of that support farmers or people that are involved in farming.
Ok. Oui, du coup, madame, la réponse est oui. Il existe déjà des groupes de travail qui soutiennent les agriculteurs dans les différentes dimensions de l'agriculture. You say support and work together, right?
Yeah.
Oui.
And
How can she join if she wants to join? I mean, before any agreement is set, is it possible?
yes, because these groups are already established and they're not part of a trade agreement, but they are there to support businesses and farmers, and so I can give the context.
Okay, you need to talk with Roy. Il faut que tu rentres en contact avec Roy pour qu'il te... C'est possible, oui, de travailler avec les groupes de soutien. Je veux dire, ça sera un travail préparatoire. Merci pour la question. Quelqu'un d'autre a une question? Sentez-vous libre d'aller chercher un café, évidemment. Whatever. Quoi qu'il arrive, on commencera la prochaine table ronde à 10h30, pétante. Je vois Pascal. Y a-t-il d'autres questions? On dirait que non. Ok, so merci beaucoup. Bulavinaka, thank you.